Hello and welcome to the Lloyd's List podcast. My name is Joshua Minchin. I'm a reporter here at Lloyd's List. And as we round off the first week proper of 2025, we're bringing you another episode in our What to Look Out For series, where our journalists have been taking you behind the curtain to point you towards the biggest talking points in store this year. We've discussed the major shipping markets and the ever-important topic of decarbonisation, but this week, we're talking risk and compliance. I sat down with Lloyd's List principal analyst Michelle Vesey-Bockman, senior reporter Toma Renan, and maritime risk analyst Bridget Dyakin to talk sanctions, AAS manipulation, and a return to the Red Sea for shipping. Just a quick note before we start though, this was recorded on December the 19th, 2024. And as you'll hear Michelle rightly point out in the podcast, a lot can change in this topic within the space of just a few hours. So just bear that in mind. Well, Michelle, Bridget, Toma, thank you so much for joining me. As our risk and compliance experts at Lloyd's List, we thought we'd gather you all to kind of look forward to what the industry can brace itself for in 2025. Let's start things off with what I know must be a very hard question, but if there's one thing that you think I should look out for as a ship owner, ship manager, in 2025 when it comes to risk and compliance, what would it be? Michelle, perhaps if we start with you.
Well, I don't think there's going to be one thing. I think there's going to be hundreds of things in the sense of hundreds of ships are going to be sanctioned.
That's Michelle Vesey-Bockman, Lloyd's List principal analyst.
I ran some numbers to see what's happened in the last quarter of this year. And the Western regulators have really gone bananas. OFAC alone has designated 240 vessels this year, 86 in the last quarter. Since the beginning of December, we've already had 90 ships, all up, designated by OFAC, the Office of Foreign Assets Control, the UK government and the EU, many of these for breaching sanctions in Russia and Iran. So I think we're going to see a coordinated pincer-like campaign that is really going to make some noise around sanctions for Russia and especially Iran when we have the incoming President Trump.
Toma, if we go to you next as our New York correspondent.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think that's the thing to sort of start watching.
That is the sound of our New York-based senior reporter, Toma Renan.
I think OFAC has taken steps since over the past few months, really since the conflict in the Middle East started, but especially since October. I think the majority of their Iran sanctions have come since. All signs indicate that this is going to accelerate under the Trump regime. Trump reimposed sanctions on Iran in 2018. The waivers, it had some temporary waivers, expired in 2019. As part of the maximum pressure campaign. But it'll be, and that really decimated Iran's export at the time. It's a different sort of situation now when you've got this massive dark fleet that has been set up specifically to skirt sanctions. It'll be a differing task to sort of, if they want to really choke off Iran's oil exports now, which all signs show that they do. And it's been a topic of much speculation. What can they do given the size of the dark fleet? But I mean, even with the recent OFAC actions, we're seeing that there's a buildup of Iranian oil on the water, and that some buyers are more cautious about it and about using sanctioned ships. So definitely a look at the return to the maximum pressure campaign and how it impacts Iran's export. But then, if those exports aren't coming to China from Iran, they're going to be coming from elsewhere. So in theory, if this crackdown is effective to the maximum, that this will mean that more mainstream tankers and LPG carriers will be carrying cargoes to China.
Can I just say something there, Josh? Things are changing so fast. We almost need to give this podcast a date stamp. So we're talking on the 19th of December at like 3 p.m. London time, because literally everything is moving so swiftly. And, I'm sure Bridget, can affirm that also with, the changes that we're seeing in the Red Sea. I feel like geopolitically, things are really heating up.
Agree completely. And that was what I was going to say, was talking about risk in terms of security.
And regular listeners will recognise that voice. It's maritime risk analyst Bridget Dyakin.
And in the Red Sea, I mean, one of my concerns is that as the situation has evolved, the Houthis have shown more sophisticated weaponry and have changed their tactics over time. So what I'm wondering is really what's in store for 2025, and how will they change the way they're targeting merchant ships. And building on the sanctions as well, though, one problem that we've seen, not necessarily recently, but it's becoming worse, is the interference with AIS, both deliberately and not even deliberate. And so when we have all these new sanctions and new programs and things to be compliant with, how do we do those due diligence checks, and how do we adapt to the changing the issues that we're having with AIS data, and as spoofing becomes more sophisticated?
One thing that I've seen, just to riff off that point, Bridget, is at the beginning of January, the US government sanctioned about 19, 20 tankers that belong to this particular dark fleet cluster serving Russian trades called Hennessy. And those Hennessy ships have more or less not traded since, but I do follow them. And their AIS spoofing can be quite cheeky. I mean, I found one in a Netherlands port the other day. I mean, clearly it's not there, but it's almost like sometimes they're laughing, having a bit of a laugh at us. And you're seeing that in the Black Sea, you're seeing that in the Mediterranean in particular. So not only are, as you say, ships spoofing their location, but we've got bad actors doing that as well, and it's really making everything so much more difficult to identify. But it's blurring the traditional ways that we used to identify deceptive shipping behavior. And there's been lots of shenanigans in the liquefied petroleum gas sector as well, which Toma has chronicled, really diligently. But, some of the deceptive shipping behaviors there are quite interesting as well.
Yeah, I think what I've noticed recently is that there's a lot of ships create very convincing AIS trails going into Iraq, mostly sort of the smaller LPG carriers, but they create very sort of convincing AIS signatures. Sometimes a little less convincing when you see 3 ships allegedly burst at the same place, but a lot of times it can easily sort of fool the eye looking just at AIS signatures, and then they obviously also carry forged documents, which usually they pick up on the way to their final destination. So I think if sort of AIS manipulation, when it began, was mostly turn the AIS off. Okay, people caught on that pretty quickly, and then we got into spoofing, and then spoofing has really evolved over time, where it is getting increasingly difficult to identify just by looking at a ship's AIS trail.
Can I ask you all for a prediction on what is probably the most important, or one of the most important but most difficult questions, which is, when is shipping going to return to the Red Sea? Because there are some in the industry that think everyone's going to go back tomorrow, and there are some that are in it for the long haul and are bunkering down for the next 4 or 5 years. Tell I can see you putting it first. I'll go to you first. Give me a date. Give me an hour.
Genuinely don't know. I'm not optimistic. I mean, the talks about a ceasefire in Gaza have been accelerating. On the other end, the Houthi sort of Israel aggression is also sort of heating up. We had Israeli airstrikes today, which were in response to a few ballistic missiles that was launched. One of them was partially intercepted and landed in central Israel. When the Red Sea is safe, when ships return, would ships want to return again? Will the Houthis do what they say, which is they said that they will stop hitting ships when the war is over? They've said it. Smarter people than me have doubted it. I'm not willing to put a bet on that.
Can I turn the question around, Josh, by saying that, there are certain sectors of shipping that never stopped going through the Red Sea. Russian tankers laden with, crude and products certainly have found their own risk assessment to be reasonably low, and or they are less likely to want to pay for the increased cost of going around the Cape of Good Hope. So there are particular trade flows that have been relatively immune because they're not part of the threat profile for the Houthis. That said, this time a year ago, or maybe 13, 14 months ago, we would never have contemplated an entire recalibration of, trades in some sectors. And The Houthis have got themselves a world audience and a world megaphone by taking this action. And I personally believe that they're going to be very reluctant to, leave behind their prominence. So, it might be protesting the war on Gaza today, but equally, they could probably find another issue on which to campaign from some sort of whatever geopolitical point of view they have. So, it just might be a new weapon for them.
The threat in the Red Sea is now fundamentally different from what it was before. And Michelle makes a really good point, though. The transits are down about 60% year on year. So we still have a decent chunk of traffic going through, but it's not obvious when shipping is going to return. For me, it's either going to be a situation where somehow it's considerably cheaper to go through the Red Sea. It makes more sense profit wise, and then people might reassess the risk, think maybe they should go through. And the other element there is just the military aspect as well. And are ships getting the protection they need? Is this going to change? Is there going to be more convoy systems, more escorts? That could also change the situation. But what concerns me is that we do have a lot of military operations going on right now in the Red Sea, and it hasn't led to a return. There's no second mass exodus, but ships aren't certainly not coming back. And I wonder, when we do get to this next stage where the Houthis say they're going to stop attacking ships or whatever, and do we believe them, whatever else, but how do we know it's actually safe? How do we define safety? Who is going to say it? Because the shipping companies certainly don't want to be the ones making that decision, and a lot of them want to err on the side of caution. So I don't know, if we have a situation where the Houthis can at any time start attacking ships and we can't, say what's safe and not, then I can't envision a future where everyone decides to go back.
When I talked to the chief executive of Norden, that's a Danish ship owner that owns and operates, I think, a fleet of more than 500 vessels. I mean, they've taken the decision not to do any Red Sea transits. And, Jan Winbo, the CEO, he made the point that, the military operations there are not in a scale or of a scale where they can guarantee any safety of the vessels. And so I don't know, Bridget, I know that you went to a conference recently, at which a lot of these people were there. Do you get a sense that they're going to sort of increase resources to the Red Sea?
That is an excellent question. At the conference, the gist of it was that the military and the industry bodies, they all want to work together. They want to find that solution, but it wasn't clear exactly how we were going to get that in terms of assets and resources and information sharing, even that. So it was encouraging in the sense that, there's this really, you can see that everyone wants to achieve something proactive, but equally you could see a bit of frustration in terms of the maritime side. Some of them were saying that they ask for escorts and, it's not always possible to provide them at the time where they need to be transiting. So that certainly is a pain point that needs to be figured out, but I'm not aware if they're going to expand on the budget or resources. But that, of course, would be really telling of how things could change.
One of the things that has really struck me is sometimes the difference in views. So, for example, UK MTO, UK Maritime Trade Office, which has a voluntary reporting system in that area. I mean, they maintain that ships transiting should have their AIS off, yet the EU NAV for Operation Aspides, the head or the commander there says, no, you shouldn't have your AIS on. And that fundamental difference in, how to even manage transits, I think, doesn't point to a very well coordinated effort at all.
No, it certainly doesn't help. And there is certainly, again, frustration among the industry because they just want kind of, black or white, yes or no, tell me one way or the other. So, yeah, it shows a bit of the disconnect. And again, it's not reassuring for the shipping industry when they can't get those straight answers and when there's so much at risk for transiting.
Michelle, just to round things off, I know you developed a naughty list of shipping. Can you run us through that? And also just tell us how you see governments addressing it in the new year.
There is a naughty list that I I drew up about 18 months ago of essentially clusters of dark shipping. And there was your Hennessy, there was your Gatic, there was Fractal, there was a lot of other companies. Also Bex, the Turkish company, which is not in the dark fleet because we know the beneficial owner. But anyway, a lot of these companies have fragmented, and they've had 2 or 3 new registered owners and or ISM managers, and they're getting harder to track as a group. But I have to say, from the recent tranche of sanctions, it's quite clear that government regulators are very, very closely watching these ships, and that they know that despite the fractured nature of their structures, that they're closely related to everything. So, your Radiating World example, which were linked to Latasco, which is the trading arm of Lukoil, a whole series of those got sanctioned earlier this month by the UK government. So government's a lot smarter and switched on, and they're thinking strategically and in a coordinated way about how to manage the dark fleet that essentially they have created by imposing these sanctions. So they're trying to find a way to, manage the, this massive dark fleet which now comprises about 14-15% of all internationally trading tankers. So definitely lots and lots of action is going to be seen in the new year.
And that's where we're going to leave it this week. Thank you so much to Michelle, Bridget and Toma for their insights. And thank you, of course, to you for listening. We do have one more instalment in this series to bring you, and that will drop at a similar time next week. But then after that, normal programming will resume for the new year, and we'll be bringing you our weekly podcast episode every Monday. If you can't wait until then, remember, you can listen to every episode of the Lloyd's List podcast on Spotify, on SoundCloud, or wherever you get your podcasts from. They're also all available in the Lloyd's List app too. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll speak to you again very soon. Goodbye.